Good evening, dear neighbors. Welcome to another wonderful presentation put on by your Diversity Awareness Group. I'm Sally Wren, Chairman of the Awareness Diversity Committee, and it's my pleasure tonight to welcome all of you. And of course, we start with acknowledging everyone who's gone before us and cleared our path, but especially the Duwamish upon whose land we stand. And so with that, I would like to, when you look Jamie Pedersen, our dear senator for the 43rd District, when you look him up on Google and different places, you get this much to talk about. But I decided to take it down to one page. So if you'll forgive me, I will introduce our speaker tonight. And so honored to have you here, Jamie. He is our state senator representing our district, graduate of Puyallup High School and Yale College, where he studied Russian and history. After a year of living in Russia and collecting oral history of Soviet-Afghan war veterans, he returned and attended Yale Law School. Jamie was elected to the Washington House of Representatives in 2006 and appointed to the Senate in 2013 and elected in 2014 and 2018. In 2021, Jamie was elected Major Floor Leader. And he shared with me earlier, he's also one that believes in co-op and co-sponsoring things like we do here at Horizon House for our programs. And he then also chaired the board of the National Civil Rights Organization called Lambda Legal and served as Lambda's lead volunteer lawyer on the state's marriage equality cases. He provides free legal services to a variety of nonprofits, such as Social Venture Partners, Seattle the Girls Choir, and Flying House Productions. I want to hear about that. That's exciting. He has sung in the Seattle Men's Chorus since 1996, and you just finished a program again? We're just about to do your holiday program each year. Jamie lives on Capitol Hill with his husband and 4 sons who attend Seattle Public Schools. It is with honor and appreciation that I bring to the podium Jamie Pedersen.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be back here. I was trying to count, and I think it might be my 19th visit to Horizon House. They're all fun, and I'm so happy that the pandemic is behind us and that we can do this in person and without everybody being hidden behind masks. I think it's a sign of my getting older that I now have not just constituents here, but all sorts of friends, not just friends that I have met over many years who have been residents of Horizon House, but former law partners and Russian chorus folks. So people, it's just been a joy to be here for the last half hour, and as more and more people come who have moved here to be able to greet many folks. What a wonderful community this is. So it's always a delight to be with you. Today is going to be a little different for me because normally I'm talking to you about what we're doing in the legislature, and today I'm talking about something that I have been doing even longer than I've served in the legislature. I'll tell you before I get into too far into the presentation, just in terms of my involvement in Lambda Legal. I knew about Lambda when I was in law school and was studying cases. I took a class called Military Justice when I was a third-year law student. And one of the cases that was in front of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit at that time was a case of a young man named Joseph Stephan, who was a Naval Academy student. And he, about 3 weeks before he graduated from the Naval Academy, had said I think he felt like he was compelled by his oath to be truthful and let his commanding officers know that he was gay. And he said, "I am gay." And as a result, they kicked him out of the Naval Academy. He didn't get to graduate. He didn't get his diploma. Didn't get to serve. And so Lambda Legal took on his case and began representing him. In the fall of 1993, when I was taking military justice, Lambda and Joseph Stephan prevailed against the military's policy excluding gay people in a panel decision before the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. And, we thought that was absolutely fantastic. I took, in my last semester of law school, a class called Sexual Orientation in the Law. And at that point, there was so little of the law that all of the cases that there had ever been fit into one case book. And we read pretty much all of them. That was in the spring of 1994. And while I was in that class, we had a bad thing happen. The full D.C. Circuit, the en banc D.C. Circuit, so all 11 judges, voted to rehear the case and reconsider the victory that Joseph Stephan and Lambda Legal had won in his case. And so the first day that I arrived to clerk for Judge Stephen Williams on the D.C. Circuit in August of 1994, in my inbox was a draft of the en banc opinion in that case. And I was horrified to see, before it became public, that's one of the things that happens when you're a clerk, you get to see these things as they're in progress, horrified to see a 7-4 decision in which the court upheld the Naval Academy's exclusion of Joseph Stephan from the Naval Academy. And then even more horrified that my judge was voting in the majority with and so there ensued, for the three of us who were clerking for him, there ensued several weeks of fairly fierce arguments about his decision in that case. And ultimately he did not change his mind, and Joseph Stephan lost 7-4. About a month later, I had a friend from law school who invited me to dinner with a friend of his, and that friend's name was Evan Wolfson. And Evan, if any of you have ever heard of him, was one of the longtime lawyers at Lambda Legal who, as a third-year student at Harvard Law School, had written a note for the law review about why same-sex couples should be allowed to marry each other. It was in 1986 or so, and it was a very path-breaking idea. That's the same year that the U.S. Supreme Court had said that it was fine to criminalize sexual activity between same-sex couples in a case called Bowers v. Hardwick. And Evan and I while our two friends and dinner companions sat there sort of twiddling their thumbs, Evan and I proceeded to have about a 2.5-hour argument about the Joseph Stephan case and what had happened. It had become public by then. And out of that developed an incredible friendship. We stay in touch regularly to this day. Evan, after his time at Lambda, went on to found an organization called Freedom to Marry that worked on marriage equality throughout the United States and now has worked on it in other countries as well. But that was really my big introduction to Lambda Legal. And so I thought for a young gay lawyer, getting a chance to be involved in Lambda was sort of the pinnacle of what I might be able to do. And when I got back to Seattle, one of the folks who had hired me to come to work at Preston, what was then called Preston, Thorgrimson, Scheidler, Gates, and Ellis, was a man named Steve Davis, who served on the Lambda Legal Board from Seattle. And Steve, in 1998, in January, invited me to consider joining the National Board of Directors. And I just thought, wow, I've died and gone to heaven. That is my dream of what I could do to be involved in making making the world fairer for LGBTQ people. And so I started working on Lambda's annual fundraiser, the garden party that we have each summer with Steve and with Barbara Bailey. Some of you may know that name. Barbara was a longtime bookstore owner on Broadway and just a fantastic person. She and I overlapped for about a year on the board before she retired. Anyway, that's my history and my beginnings with Lambda. Now let me tell you a little bit about Lambda and then we'll get to how we all intersect. So Lambda Legal was founded 50 years ago this year. In fact, we just a month ago passed the 50th anniversary for the organization. And Lambda's first case was a case about its right to exist. They filed their articles of incorporation with the New York Secretary of State, and the New York Secretary of State rejected Lambda's ability to create an organization. It said that you couldn't possibly have a nonprofit charitable organization to support the rights of homosexuals because it is neither benevolent nor charitable. And so they had to go to court and fight with the New York Secretary of State's office to have the right to exist, and they prevailed in their first case. And I think the world is better for that. They basically copied the Articles of Incorporation from the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund, and that's where Lambda's organization came from. So Lambda, now this third bullet point, if you can, I can't tell you how many hours dozens of lawyers sat around and argued about every single word in this mission statement, but they're all important. So it's a national organization. That is very important to the folks there, that the spread is for the entire United States, committed to achieving full recognition of the civil rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people and those living with HIV. And now here are the three pillars. We'll talk about this a little bit more through impact litigation, education, and public policy work. And the most important of those is impact litigation. So Lambda Legal is not it's not a legal services organization that just takes on cases for people who can't afford to pay. Every year, Lambda has a help desk, and it receives several thousand calls each year from people who have been discriminated against or who have run into problems because of their sexual orientation or their gender identity. They can't, with roughly, well, you can see 26 lawyers and 9 paralegals, they can't really hope to take on several thousand cases. In fact, they can take on only a very tiny percentage of them. So what they do is they try to sort through those. They try to get people to helpful resources as much as possible. But out of all of those cases, they try to choose the ones that will have the biggest potential for helping the most people and for moving civil rights forward for LGBTQ people. And we'll talk about some of the cases that they've taken on and how those have changed the world for those of us who depend on Lambda Legal's work. So their headquarters is in New York, and they have, over time, opened up regional offices in LA, Chicago, Atlanta, Dallas, and most recently in Washington, D.C. And all of the work that they do, they're now at their biggest size in the history of the organization, but still only 26 lawyers doing all that. So, a relatively small-sized firm to accomplish all of that. Okay. So here are a few greatest hits of Lambda Legal's work. So one of the first really prominent cases was called Bonner, and that was a Bonner v. Gay Student Group. And so that was a case that guaranteed the rights of gay and lesbian students to have student clubs on college campuses. It seems pretty unexceptional now, but 50 years ago that was quite path-breaking, that you could have college students that were able to do that. And I think it's worth remembering, we'll get to talk a little bit more about this, it's worth remembering that in most of the United States, it was a crime to have sex with somebody of the same sex. It was a crime. Okay, 1983, so this is 3 years into the AIDS epidemic, and Lambda was already doing work on behalf of people with HIV in People v. 49 West 12 Tenants Corp. They won the first federal housing protections for people living with HIV, allowing them to be able to stay without discrimination in housing of their choosing. Lambda's first Washington-related case came in 1992. Many of you, I think, would know Greta Kammermeyer, who still comes and visits us with some regularity. She and her wife live up on Whidbey Island. But in Greta's case, Lambda won reinstatement of her to the National Guard after she had been discharged for coming out as a lesbian. In 1996, this is a case sort of near and dear to my heart, called Nabuzny versus Podlesny. Jamie Nabuzny was a high school student who was relentlessly harassed, beaten, tortured because he had come out as gay. He lived in Wisconsin, or as my mom's family would say, he's from Wisconsin. Lambda took on his case, and that was also path-breaking. I mean, just really out there 30 years ago to talk about kids who were gay. You know, there's a long time trope that homosexuals are out recruiting children, and so for I think a lot of organizations stayed far away to avoid having any accusation that there was grooming or pedophilia or whatever. And Lambda took this case, realized that kids coming out earlier and earlier really needed to be safe at school, and won this case. And it was the first time that courts held that federal law required all public schools to protect their LGBTQ students from bullying and harassment. Another one dear to my heart is the case of James Dale. So I'm an Eagle Scout, and I'm, it's funny, after I became an Eagle Scout in 1984, and then spent a lot of years with a very complicated relationship with the Boy Scouts of America, frustrated by their exclusion both of Scouts and of Scout leaders who were gay. And this is one of those cases. So my friend Evan Wolfson was the person who argued this before the United States Supreme Court. And James Dale was a Scout in New Jersey who had sued under New Jersey's anti-discrimination law, essentially saying that he should have a right to participate in Scouts just like any other boy. And the New Jersey Supreme Court upheld his right and said that the New Jersey anti-discrimination law protected his ability to participate in Scouts. The Scouts took the case to the U.S. Supreme Court, where in a heartbreaking 5-4 decision, the court said that the Scouts had the right, through freedom of association, to exclude James from the Scouts. This is one of those you lose the battle but win the war kind of situations, though, because I think that the public attention that was brought to the issue through James's case really was the beginning of the end of the policy for the Scouts. It began a huge wave of activism from corporations that had supported the Boy Scouts, from all sorts of individual people through United Way campaigns. So Sue will probably remember what a pain in the behind I was for our United Way campaign by insisting that we be able to leave out the Boy Scouts while they had not changed their policy. And I'll just give you the happy end to this story is that when our oldest son, Trygve, was about to turn 8, I was just kind of tormented. I thought, well, wow, this is my political belief, but this was such an important organization for me, in terms of forming my values and my community service, not to mention my outdoor skills. Can I really, in good conscience, keep my kids, because I have 4 boys, can I keep them out of Scouts and deny them an opportunity to participate in that? So I reached out to one of my former law partners, a man named Hugh Bangisser, who served on the Scout Council, and said, hey, I don't want this to become a big political to-do. I just want my kids to... Is there some place that you can think of where they could participate in Scouts without having it become a big issue? And he said, let me think about it and get back to you. He got back to me and said, well, there's a PAC that's just organized recently up at St. Joe's on Capitol Hill, and I think that they'd be very open to this. So I called up the Cub Master, explained the situation. He said, we talked about this when we formed the PAC, and we all said, if a gay kid wants to participate or a gay family wants to participate, by God, we're going to make sure that they can. And if anybody doesn't like it, then we're all going to quit together. And so I said, well, gosh, that sounds pretty good. I think we'll go ahead. And no sooner had we made the decision to start up in Scouts, but the Scouts announced that they were changing their policy. And so gay Scouts were included and welcome in Scouting. And then a year later, they allowed gay leaders to participate in Scouting. And then a year after that, they let girls in, which has also been a great change for us. But I have felt so... It's just another one of the cases in which I have felt so blessed in my life to have been the beneficiary of the great work that Lambda and many other organizations have been doing, trying to change the world in this way. All right, in 2000, so I should say, literally the month that I joined the board of Lambda, so this is October 1998, a man named John Lawrence and and another man named Tyrone Garner went home to John Lawrence's house to have sex. And the police department in Harris County, the Harris County Sheriff's Office, burst in the door and arrested them and put them in jail for homosexual sodomy. And there began the case that is called Lawrence v. Texas, which worked its way through the courts in the years that I was on the board. I became the co-chair of Lambda's board in February 2003, and actually got sworn into the Supreme Court bar so that I could go back to Washington, D.C., and I got to sit in the front row while this case was being argued. And this is arguably the most important case that Lambda has ever done. In this case, the United States Supreme Court, in a wonderful decision by Justice Tony Kennedy, announced that Bowers v. Hardwick was wrongly decided, that there was no way consistent with the liberty and equality protections under the U.S. Constitution for states to criminalize consenting adults from engaging in same-sex sex. And so we won that case, and Lawrence is really the foundation on which almost all of the movement's subsequent success is built. It's been cited in the marriage equality cases, and really every good development that has happened for our community since then. And then, I guess I'll hasten to add that in the Dobbs decision, striking down Roe v. Wade last year, Clarence Thomas took direct aim at Lawrence, not to mention Griswold v. Connecticut, which allowed birth control, overcoming a Connecticut statute, because I think he understands how, all of those cases that protected liberty under the Constitution are connected to each other. But anyway, we're still enjoying having the case in effect. And then in 2015, the culmination for me of 20 years of work on marriage equality was the decision in the case called Obergefell v. Hodges, and that is the marriage equality case that came out of the state of Ohio was consolidated with several others and went up. And again, Justice Kennedy wrote the opinion for the majority, finding that consistent with the Constitution, same-sex couples could not be excluded from marriage in our country. Okay, so you can see quite a range of good things over time. So here are the three pillars that I mentioned to you, impact litigation. So right now, this is as of about a month ago, Lambda had 78 active cases going on in 19 different states. 16 of those have been newly filed just this year in 2023. 5 of those are on new laws that try to restrict the availability of gender-affirming care to youth. So these are young people who identify as transgender and want to be treated according to the sex with which they identify, the gender with which they identify. And we'll talk about this in just a second, but legislators all over the country have concluded that it's their business to interfere with those medical decisions between doctors and families and kids and try to dictate what ought to happen there. Public policy is the second big pillar, and in public policy that basically means lobbying, trying to affect what happens in both within the legislative process, mostly at the state level, and then also in the regulatory process, working with different agencies that have an effect on how kids grow up. So, for example, one of the things over the last 10 or 15 years that Lambda has done a lot is work with agencies like our Department of Children, Youth, and Families to make sure that LGBTQ kids who are going through the foster care system or the juvenile justice system are treated fairly and in accordance with their needs. So this year, if you can imagine such a thing, in 2023, 567 anti-LGBTQ bills were introduced in legislatures around the country. 47 states, including Washington State, had such bills introduced. Of course, here, they go nowhere, I'm happy to say, both because we have good chairs of the judiciary and other committees, and then also because in the House, the decisions about what comes to a floor vote are made by our wonderful lesbian Speaker of the House, Lori Jenkins. And in the Senate, decisions about what comes to a floor vote are made by, well, me. So I don't think there's any likelihood that any of those bills will be seeing the light of day anytime soon. Of those bills, 415 would facilitate discrimination against transgender people. You know, many of you remember the 2004 elections and how the Republicans and under George W. Bush, thought that they would ride marriage, the defense of marriage, to victory, and brought constitutional amendments in states all across the country because they found it to be a winning wedge issue for them. And transgender people are today's wedge issue. It's just atrocious to watch how they're being treated. Although I will say I'm very happy that in our state, we passed only bills to protect transgender people. I had a bill this last session that allowed trans folks to seal the records of their name changes so that they can't be put out in public and have harassment to them. That bill came to me from a young computer science student at the University of Washington who brought me the issue. Marco Lias brought a bill that allows homeless trans kids to be able to seek gender-affirming care and find safe shelter and housing without fear of being returned to the family that kicked them out in the first place. And that became a giant controversy, but we passed that bill. Anyway, so lest you feel complete doom and gloom about what's going on in the country, there are some places like Washington where good things are going on. 184 bills about education. These are folks who think that the legislature ought to be the great school board in the sky and get involved in curriculum decisions about how teachers talk about gay and lesbian people in history, or even introduce through sexual health curriculum the idea that there are gay people. 72 bills about school sports. One really wonderful Lambda case is about a 12-year-old trans girl who just wants to run on the track team, and had to fight all the way up to the, that Sixth Circuit, I guess, to get a decision that supported her ability to participate in middle school sports. Really? We should be arguing about this. Anyway, and then 96 of these bills were actually enacted, unfortunately providing plenty for Lambda Legal to do. The third pillar of Lambda's work is public education, and all of these cases have not only the direct effect of making precedents on which you can build in other similar cases protecting people, but they also have the benefit of teaching the public about the reality of the discrimination that LGBTQ people face in much of our country. You know, still in the large majority of states, it's legal to be fired for being gay, just for being gay. Happily not in Washington since 2006, but that is the state of the world for a lot of people. And, you know, you think about what it would mean to get, you know, to be able to get married to the person you love, but then be fired because of having gotten married to the person that you love. Wow, that's a pickle for people to be in. Protected and Served is a campaign that has to do with police violence against gay and lesbian people. Of course, the origin of the modern gay rights movement was out of a riot that happened at the Stonewall Bar in New York City when transgender people of color were being harassed and arrested by police there. And that riot, I think, really inspired a whole wave of activism. And unfortunately, that relationship with the police continues in a lot of parts of the country. The HIV Know Your Rights campaign is about helping people with HIV know that they do have legal protections in housing and employment. And Lambda has worked very hard over the last now 40 years to establish those protections. And then the Every Child Deserves a Family, Youth and Out-of-Home Care. I talked a little bit about that, about the work for kids in the foster care system to make sure that they are treated well and that they're placed appropriately in families. Okay, so some of the big program priorities that Lambda is working on right now in 2023, in the face of all of those bad bills, making sure that families have access for trans kids to gender-affirming care. Fighting against school facilities restrictions, that's AKA bathroom bills, telling young people which bathroom they ought to be going to, and school sports bans, which we talked about a little bit. Combating school censorship and book bans. We've had some of that go on even here in our state. You all have probably read about cases down in Kent, for example, where librarians are either pulling out books in which LGBTQ youth could find themselves from the library, pretending that they don't exist, or on the other hand, being forced by parents who apparently are afraid that their frail children would be somehow corrupted if exposed to the idea that gay people exist. So this, unfortunately, in 2023 is yet another fight about what should be available in the library for kids. Ending discriminatory restrictions on updating identity documents. So this really has to do with whether trans folks can get state identification or even federal identification in the form of a passport that is consistent with their gender identity. You can imagine for somebody who is a transgender man presenting as a man, if the only thing that you're allowed to carry is a passport that identifies you as a female, then that can lead to some real problems when you're trying to go through customs or to go through airport security or whatever. So this is really important stuff for the day-to-day details of and logistics of life. The misuse of free speech and religious freedom protections, I think what I haven't really yet talked about is that there's a sort of evil twin of Lambda Legal that's called the Alliance Defense Fund. Actually, now it's called Alliance Defending Freedom, but ADF, we refer to it as. It's an organization that is roughly 5 times the size of Lambda Legal and is funded by people who want to end abortion, who want to end rights for LGBTQ people, who want to undo marriage equality. And they are busy battling all over the country to try to roll back the protections that we have won. What they typically use are the protections in the First Amendment to free speech and freedom of religion, to try to say that somehow they are the victims, that their folks' constitutional rights are being infringed on by protections for the LGBTQ community. And, we have a vivid example of that right in our state that came out of Richland with the case of Arlene's Flowers. So this is a woman who didn't want to have to make a flower arrangement to celebrate a wedding of a gay couple, because she thought that it was against the Bible. And, she has a business that's open to the public. So she, under our law, owes a duty to everybody from the public to serve them without discrimination. And happily, during 2 trips to our Supreme Court and 1 trip up to the big Supreme Court, the rights of the gay couple and our state's anti-discrimination law were upheld, and she was not permitted. The happy epilogue to that story I read here now in the Times maybe a year ago is that a new owner bought the business from her and happily serves LGBTQ couples. So if you're ever in Richland, you can stop into the business that's still called Arlene's Flowers, but is no longer run by Arlene, and it'll welcome your business no matter who you are. And then last, advancing the rights of people with HIV, LGBTQ seniors, and LGBTQ youth. I think over time we have realized how both young people and then older folks are potentially in a position of having to be back in the closet because it's very difficult in some states to find housing for same-sex couples. Okay, or for people who just want to be out in their lives. Even here in the Pacific Northwest, we have some cases going on. So one case that we have going on here in Washington is about a trans boy who is challenging Premera Blue Cross's refusal to pay for gender-affirming care that is medically necessary and has been indicated by the primary care provider for the kid. So I think we feel optimistic about the prospects there. Perkins Coie is the cooperating attorney. The lawyers there are the cooperating attorneys with Lambda Legal in those cases. I should say, by the way, Sue and I at Preston did some of this work as cooperating attorneys. One of the great things about the work that Lambda Legal does is that it doesn't all have to be done by the 26 lawyers who are on staff. And in fact, a lot of the best work that happens because there are volunteer lawyers all across the country who kind of fight for the right to be the cooperating lawyers with Lambda in these cases that Lambda brings. And obviously, Lambda has offices only in 5 states, so it can't be out in that many states doing business without the help of people who are qualified local counsel and who can help. We also have another case in the state of Montana that we do along with the ACLU, the National ACLU and the ACLU of Montana, that is about a challenge to the AB 99, or the SB 99, sorry, which is the ban on gender-affirming care that the state of Montana adopted for its entire population. And I think we're hopeful about the prospects for that too. Surprisingly, Montana has a pretty robust constitution in terms of supporting individual rights, and it's had a court that over time has been pretty willing to enforce those rights. So that's a good thing. I think it's worth saying there too that there are, those of you who have worked in the nonprofit world know that there's sometimes some competition for resources that grows up among nonprofits that work in a similar space. I think one of the things that I have loved about being involved in Lambda Legal over the years is that the 4 big national organizations that do this work, Lambda, the ACLU, the National Center for Lesbian Rights, and GLAAD, which used to be called Gay and Lesbian Advocates and Defenders. I have to think now if I can say it correctly. GLBTQ Legal Advocates and Defenders, now it stands for, but they're based in Boston. Those 4 organizations have been coming together for 30 years to something that's called the Round Table. In the old days, all of the lawyers who were doing this work in the country could get together in one conference room and talk about what they were working on. Now it's a little bigger and it's more complicated, but they coordinate, right? They're all trying to do the same thing, and so they work with each other to make sure that, hey, have you got Missouri? Because we're going to work on Oklahoma then. And among them, they try to provide the broadest set of protections for people by making sure that people all across the country have representation when they need to in the face of so much vitriol. Yet another thing that I have been very happy about. All right, now I think we can bring, and this, by the way, the man to your right is John Lawrence. I was very privileged to be able to sit at the table with him and have lunch right after the oral argument in his case before the U.S. Supreme Court. And the African-American guy who's also facing the camera there is Tyrone Garner. So, and that's a scene from right after they won their case in the U.S. Supreme Court. All right, I think we can bring up the lights. Thank you for going down memory lane with me. It is a great pleasure for me to get to talk about. I spent 7 years on the national board, 2 of them co-chairing the board, and then when I left, I chaired for the last 17 years the National Leadership Council for Lambda Legal, which is a group of volunteer fundraisers who are continue to be involved in Lambda Legal's work. And I, this year, finally, 5 years ago, I told them, I've been doing this for a really long time. I think we better think about succession. I said, I'll give you 5 more years, but you got to work out a plan for somebody to come after me. And happily, they did identify someone. So I am just in the process of handing over the chairmanship of the NLC, but I continue to serve on the NLC, and am very proud to be associated with this organization. So. All right, with that, I welcome your questions and thank you very much for your attention. Yeah, I think we'll have microphones so that everybody can hear.
Do your sons find they have to interpret you to their playmates, your work?
Wow, so do my sons find that they have to interpret me? My sons, I was sharing this with a few of you before, my sons are now 16, 14, 14, and 14. And I feel privileged on any day when I get more than a grunt from them. Mostly they're politely interested when I talk to them about what I'm working on. But I think we're really lucky to live in a bubble here in Seattle. So we have, I'll tell you, so Eric, my husband, is a public school, he's a teacher again. He was a teacher for many years and then was a principal. He was very anxious about sending our oldest son to kindergarten. And, what he had fixated in his mind is what's going to happen when they get to Mother's Day and they have a Mother's Day project. And how is Trygve going to feel when he has to make a Mother's Day card and he's thinking, well, who am I going to make a card for? And so he just had this anxiety sort of stewing in him for years probably before. And this went on and on, I'm like, well, look, it's going to be fine. We live in Seattle, it'll be fine. We went to Stevens Elementary School to the open house before school started for kindergarten. And we sat down, and this just fantastic teacher, her name was Carlin Luke. I had visited her classroom as a legislator before, so I knew she was quite good. But she was so organized, and I could just feel Eric's anxiety level decreasing as he saw her syllabus and heard about her lesson plans for the year. And then she said, oh, and I can't believe I forgot to introduce you to my wife and our daughter. And we thought, wow, we're home. We're going to be just fine. Probably the only other, I'll just tell you one other little anecdote, give you a window into our family. So we got a call from our son's Trygve's third grade teacher in 2016, who happened to be a gay man as well. His name was John Carroll. And he was very worried about Trygve because they had had a mock election in the class, and Trygve cast his vote for Donald Trump. which Trygve thought was a joke, but the teacher was worried enough that this had happened that he felt compelled to call us as the parents to let us know. So anyway, I think the reality is this is just so much not an issue for kids that are the age of my kids. They have grown up in a different world, and they don't even know why we talk about it. I make them go march with the Scouts in the Pride Parade every year. Oh, Papa, really? Why do we have to do that? And I oh, come on, support your parents. Anyway, okay.
Jamie,
yes.
A question about litigation strategy. When Lambda loses a case, like I think they did recently in the Ninth Circuit, a restroom case in a high school in Idaho, maybe, and there's a split in the circuits. Some circuits permit it, some say it's unconstitutional. So when you lose a case and you're thinking about should we appeal to the Supreme Court, are you reluctant to do that with the court composed as it is now? You want to wait, let the circuits do what they want to do for a while? Is that a litigation factor?
That is absolutely one of the core questions before Lambda ever files a petition for a writ of certiorari. That's trying to get the Supreme Court to hear a case. Yes, absolutely. With this court, we have to be incredibly careful about which cases go up. And sometimes Lambda makes a decision that even though a case is badly decided by a circuit, it is too risky to everyone else in the country to have this current Supreme Court deciding things. Now, I will say that Justice Gorsuch, who, isn't generally somebody that I have loved decisions by, had a really wonderful decision that found that the Federal Civil Rights Act protects gender identity against discrimination in all of the states in housing and employment, and that has been, the Congress continues to struggle with trying to pass any sort of federal anti-discrimination protection, but that decision from basically the current Supreme Court has been a huge boon to us. So it's not a slam dunk that you wouldn't go to the Supreme Court, but it really requires careful thinking and careful reading of tea leaves from the different justices. We know there's zero possibility that Justice Thomas or Justice Alito is ever going to be with us on anything. But the others have enough sort of variety that it requires some very nuanced thinking about what the possibilities are. But absolutely, that is a huge question about sometimes we just have to do a strategic retreat on cases that we've brought if we get a bad decision. Thank you.
On your statistics of cases current, there was a number at the bottom, and it had to do with transgender. And so I'm asking, okay, those are cases 96 currently in states across the United States that have ruled
yeah.
against?
Okay, no, so sorry to be, so the cases are in the first column, the impact litigation column. So 78 active cases that Lambda Legal is bringing in 19 states. The next column is about the bad things that various legislatures are doing. So 96 is the number of laws that legislatures around the country have passed. Now, some of those have been challenged in cases by Lambda, and some in cases by the sister organizations, the ACLU and NCLR and GLAD. Not all of them have been challenged because, number one, there aren't enough resources, and number two, there isn't necessarily good law, or we don't have good judges in places that would make it a good idea to bring a legal challenge. But yeah.
Hi, thanks for coming. This is so fascinating. One of the things that has struck me, if you have 100 people in a room, and maybe 50 are men and 50 are women and so on. I mean, all this attention to this small group of people who feel like they have gender dysphoria. I mean, what's the percentage that we're even talking about?
That's a good question. It is more and more as it becomes more socially acceptable, I think, for people to talk about where they identify on the spectrum of gender. I think, even when I grew up in the 1970s, and certainly for those of you who are older, you can remember all the sorting that happens, everything from, is the room going to be pink or blue, right, to the toys that kids are, there were just very rigid expectations about what proper gender roles were. Now, I grew up in a family where my mom, who was very hardworking and quite ambitious, she became a principal in the 1970s. Well, I should say before that, she was a teacher. She was fired because she was pregnant with me. And it wasn't even thought of as a strange thing. It was, well, of course you're going to be fired. You can't possibly be teaching if you've got a young baby to take care of at home. Now, why wouldn't be my dad taking care of me? I don't, who knows? But that was absolutely the assumption. That was the stereotype and the gender role. Well, my mom became a principal by the late 70s at a time when women were not school principals. And she always made, when I was growing up, she always made more money than than my dad did. So it didn't strike me as particularly odd. But, for a lot of the world, I'll tell you, I had this sort of light bulb moment. Sue and I had a partner who said to me at one point, why the heck do these people care? Why is it such a big deal to them? And, and I really wrestled with that. I didn't understand why does it matter to you if I'm going to get married? We're not running out of marriage licenses, as Evan Wolfson used to say. And then I went to the wedding of my cousin Brooks and his wife Angela, and they got married in Hawaii, and they brought their pastor along, a fairly conservative Presbyterian minister, who was giving the sermon at their wedding, and this light bulb went off in my head. Because what did he say? He said, Brooks, St. Paul tells us that you are to be Angela's head. It's your job to do the thinking in this relationship. You're in charge, and you must think very carefully about the decisions that you're going to be making for Angela. And Angela, God wants you to graciously submit to Brooks's will. Wow, I had never been to a wedding like that. And suddenly the light went off in my head. For a whole group of people with whom I had not shared any philosophy, marriage was about putting men in charge of women. And if you could have two people in a marriage with equal gender, how could it be about putting men in charge of women? Right? So I think, I don't know what the percent, is it 0.5%? Is it 2%? I don't know. I mean, it's a relatively small slice of the population, right? But I think that there is something fundamentally threatening for the patriarchy in particular about the idea that people's gender could change, about the idea that gay and lesbian couples could marry each other, and so I have come to believe over many years of working on that this is why this elicits such an emotional reaction from people with whom it doesn't have anything to do, right? So that's, I guess that's the best answer that I can give you.
Yeah, I actually don't have a question. I just wanted to say that as a teacher for 20 years, I think a lot of the reason why they wouldn't, earlier than when I was teaching, wouldn't hire women who could get pregnant had another aspect, and that was that the teacher would start looking pregnant, and then she would have to be able to discuss things that the parents didn't want her to discuss. So that's my view of what I saw during the era.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that there's probably something to that. Although I will say, the funny story with my mom, she got fired by one district, I don't remember if it was Highline or Renton, and then got a job at another district. I was supposed to be born in August. Well, I wasn't born until September 9th. So school started and she showed up at the beginning of school, 9 months and a week pregnant. So there was some splaining to do, as Ricky Ricardo would say. Then she was out for 10 days or something like that and then went back to work. But anyway, yes.
So what does the Greek letter lambda, why that?
I should know this history better, but basically, lambda, that letter, lambda, has been for more than 50 years in the LGBT, in the gay rights movement, as it was then called, symbolic of sort of change and progress. And so that was why it was kind of a secret code word at the time when it was started. And over time, there have been a lot of discussions about, should we have some different, more generic, easier to access name? And I think, I don't know, there's just so much history at this point and so much what we call brand equity with it that we've never decided. We did shorten the name while I was on the board because officially it's called Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund, Inc. And so we shortened that to just Lambda Legal. But yes, that's what I can tell you. All right. Any other questions? Okay. Andy.
Jamie, this is a bit of an awkward question, but it's something I've heard brought up enough at Horizon House that I can't think of a better place to have it discussed. And it's the issue of this gender-affirming care, how young should a child be? Because several of us know of cases, I know of one, where people have changed their minds. They've taken physical steps, have breasts removed or whatever, and then decided they made the wrong choice. Does Lambda get involved in any of this, or is any age the age at which the child decides?
Yeah, so look, I want to be super clear about what gender-affirming care is and what gender-affirming care is not. For kids who are, probably younger than well, younger than puberty, so I don't know, 10, 11, 12. Gender affirming care probably doesn't mean much more than pronouns, names, sort of respectful interaction, maybe something about clothing. It never, ever would involve surgery or anything that would be permanent, okay? And that is true for any kid who is under 18, right? Now, kids in our state beginning at age 13 have agency. They have the ability to make their own decisions with their care providers. Eric and I were somewhat stunned when we got to the point where we could no longer access records for our kids without their permission. But that is the law, and that's partly the law because we want to protect the right of young women to make decisions about whether they want to become moms, and free of the baleful influence sometimes of their parents. So that's the origin of that statute in Washington, but we do protect those rights. Now, these decisions about, I think, for the most part, what starts happening with medication as puberty is setting on, is that you're talking about blockers, basically medications that preserve the status quo and don't allow, say, the development of breasts for a young person who is identifying as a transgender boy, or don't allow, basically hold things in place until there can be more thought, more discernment, more time, but not permanent. No permanent changes. Certainly, no surgery should be happening, would be defended by anyone, including all of the American Medical Association, like all of the pediatricians. Like this just doesn't happen. That's not the medical standard of practice. But the medical standard of practice is that kids are experiencing gender dysphoria at pretty young ages and are without access to even that limited care of being called by their preferred pronouns or being able to dress in a way that feels natural to them. The difference in depression and rates of suicide for kids who get gender affirming care and kids who don't are just dramatic. Kids who get gender affirming care actually have lower rates of suicide and depression than the general population of kids. Kids who don't get gender affirming care but are experiencing gender dysphoria are dramatically higher risk of self-harm. So, this is why these decisions ought to be up to families and their medical professionals and not up to legislators. Okay, sorry. Yes, but that's, okay. All right, Sally's given me the hook.
Oh, thank you so much, Jamie. You've given us more information that we all need to share and be more diverse and understand each other. So we really appreciate your time and energy to come with us again. And I thank all of you for coming out tonight, and this will be our last program of this year, but we thank you for your support, and I just love our beloved community, and I will work as hard as I can to see that that's sustained and continues on to all of our future. Thank you again, and thank you so much.